Now, before we jump into this, you want to print out a degree wheel. You'll see why this comes into play later on. Now, obviously, you will need to remove both valve covers. To do this, pretty simple. You have just the air cleaner assembly, and then on top you have a, it's called an air intake surge tank. And then you have access to the valve covers, and you just remove them. And now we need to find top dead center. And to do that, we need to turn the crankshaft clockwise. You'll need a 22mm socket, and in this case, a 1/2" drive ratchet. If you have the spark plugs removed, it will make the job a little bit easier. So once again, rotating the crank clockwise, don't ever go counterclockwise. And on the crankshaft pulley, you see I just reinstalled the spark plugs. I should have left them out for this job, but that's okay. And on the pulley, you'll see a paint mark and a small indentation in the pulley. You're marking up this paint mark with the 0° setting on the timing cover. Now, it's a little hard to really get underneath and see what's going on. So with your camera, just turn on the light. You can bring this down and see precisely where you are. You want to be right on 0°. I have a touch more to go. Okay, that looks good. So we have a few markings to verify that we are at top dead center. So look at the cam phaser here. You see this little indentation? You have 2 of them on the left-hand side, or the driver's side on the vehicle. Now, if you don't see these indentations, you want to rotate the crank another 360 degrees. And then you'll find these markings. And to verify that everything is timed, this line marks up with this guy on the bearing cap. On the left-hand side, these 2 lines, you have a marking on the bearing cap. The bearing cap marking is in between both lines. And then this is the sprocket for the exhaust. That dot marks up with this guy on the bearing cap. And same thing on the right-hand side. Everything lines up, okay? So now we can move on to the next step. Now, if those timing marks don't line up, chances are the check engine light is on your vehicle for a stretched timing chain, which this vehicle did. So this is the last video before we start the vehicle for the first time and verify that the new timing chains are in good shape. But let's assume that your vehicle is mechanically right on the money, and now we need to check the valves. Now, to do this, you need a feeler gauge. If you don't have one of these, I will link one in the description box below. And as you can see, you have, hold on, not sure if this is going to pick up on the camera, but you have a number of different measurements that we can use to see if these valves are right on the money. Grab my Fisher-Price step stool. This makes a very big difference if you're not very tall and working on these trucks. So here on the right-hand side means in the US, passenger side, okay? Right-hand side, cylinders 1, 3, 5. This is your intake cam. This is your exhaust cam, okay? You can tell this is exhaust because right here is the exhaust manifold. Feeler gauge, we're looking at 2 measurements here. And you're measuring the space between the cam lobes and the lifter. Right here is the lifter, okay? Now, the minimum you want to be for number 1, so cylinder 1 intake, is 0.15 millimeters. Max is 0.25. So 0.15 fits in, 0.15 fits in. Jump over to 0.25, maximum, okay? Max. No go. I can most likely really snake it in there if I wanted to, but it's really, really nice and tight. So that's 1 intake. Now let's jump over to 3 exhaust. Now for the exhaust, you want 0.29, max 0.39. Now I don't have anything that matches those numbers, but I have 0.30, max 0.38. So I'm happy with that. Let's try the minimum. This is 0.305. That fits in. That fits in. Let's jump over, in my case, 0.38. Again, the max is 0.39. I just don't have it on this feeler gauge. You see how tight it is? So these are right on the money. This vehicle is an 07, 104,000 miles. You see, I cannot get it in there. So this is right on the money. Number 1 intake, number 3 exhaust. And now we're on the driver's side or left-hand side of the vehicle. You're doing that same measurement. I'm not going to show it in that much detail because you get the gist. But number 6 intake. Okay, so again, this is your intake, this is your exhaust. 6 intake, and then number 2 exhaust. Once again, intake, you want to be between 0.15, 0.25 millimeters. Exhaust, 0.29 to 0.39 millimeters. Now, before we continue to the other valves, we need to rotate the engine 240 degrees. This is where this guy comes into play. Before we do that, again, you want to record any valves that are out of spec. And I'll come back later on why that's really very, very important. So now we need to rotate the crankshaft 240 degrees. You want to be precise, don't guess it. So if we line this up with the crankshaft pulley, right now the timing mark is roughly at 3 o'clock. So bring it over 180 degrees. This would be 190, 200, 210, 220, 230, 240. Right here is where we want to be. So right now the crank is here. I need to place it over here. A little masking tape. Line everything up. And I'll just place some tape on this idler so it doesn't move, just in case. Double check one more time, and we can rock and roll. That looks good to me. And here we go, rotate it 240 degrees. Way easier with the spark plugs out, way easier. This is a lot more difficult. Should have left them out. Okay, we're at 240 degrees. So at this point, you get the gist. I'm just going to tell you which cylinders to check. So in this case, it's number 3 intake. So that's this guy up here. Again, you want to be between 0.15 and 0.25. And then number 5, exhaust. Once again, exhaust is 0.29 to 0.39 mil. And on the driver's side, you're checking number 2 intake and number 4 exhaust, okay? And then one more time, you need to rotate the crankshaft another 240 degrees. And finally, on the right-hand side, you're checking number 1 exhaust, number 5 intake, and on the driver's side, number 4 intake, and number 6, a little hard to see here on camera, but number 6 exhaust, okay? Okay, a few things as we wrap this up. Now pay attention because this will save you money, I promise. Doing this work yourself, you're probably saving, my guess, like 300 bucks. But when it comes time to reinstalling the parts, the valve covers, brand new gaskets. Now in my case, I happen to have Felpro gaskets here. They are made in Japan. I've always had very good success using Felpro, but if you want to buy Toyota OEM, I believe the pair is 50 bucks at the dealership. Now this is where it counts. This is the gasket for the intake air plenum, that large tank that lives on top of the plenum, I should say. So you always, again, want to use brand new gaskets. Now any parts you need, you want to buy them online and pick them up at the dealership. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but very quickly, if you just drive to the local dealership and you're at the parts department, they will charge you more money. This right here is $29 at my local dealership. But if I purchase it online for store pickup, at the same dealership, same part, it's $14. And this is something I'll go over in a future video. It happened to me recently, so go online, buy the parts, pick it up at the dealership. It's drastically less. Next thing, regarding leaks. Now there's a section where the timing cover meets the cylinder heads on both sides of the engine. You're either adding FIPG, this is something that I showed when we reinstalled the timing cover. This is $21 at the local dealership. If you don't want to spend that kind of money, I've always, again, had good success using the right stuff. This, I believe, is like 11, 12 bucks. But you just want to put a small bead. According to the manual, it's only 3 millimeters, the thickness. So just a small bead at these locations, because if you don't, you will develop a leak. So it's really, really important. Now, lastly, what do you do if you have any valves out of spec? You ultimately have 3 options. I'll start with the most expensive option, but what I think is probably the fastest thing you could do if you need to get your truck up and running. And that's removing both cylinder heads and installing remanufactured heads with a warranty. Now this will cost you $1,200 to $1,400, but that is by far the fastest way. Secondly is removing the cylinder heads and bringing them to a machine shop. Let them do all the work. Now they have the expertise, they have really precise measurements that they can, of course, follow at their shop. My guess may be $800 to do everything. I don't know, because you want to replace everything, and that's option 3. And what happens is if you have any measurements out of spec, you have to replace the lifters. Now, to find the right lifter, you're calculating how far out of spec that valve is. You take that and punch that into a formula, and that formula lets you know the correct lifter to buy. So you're removing camshafts, you're removing the timing chains, you're really getting in there, and you want everything to be perfect. Your measurements have to be spot on. So that's why I'm thinking machine shop, so you don't mess anything up. Nonetheless, you're going to be in there for a while and you're going to spend some money. That's just the bottom line. Or you could just sell the truck and call it a day, right? I mean, that's just option 4. So at this point, this is really the last video before we start this for the first time. Just replace the timing chain, so I hope you tune in for that. And as always, thank you for watching.